One secret, one kiss, one lie that shattered her perfect world. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan penthouse as Sarah Martinez pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching the city blur through her tears. 24 hours ago, she thought she had everything figured out. 24 hours ago, she believed she was living the fairy tale she'd always dreamed of. Now standing in designer heels that cost more than her old monthly rent, wearing a dress that still had the tags hidden beneath the elegant fabric, she felt like the biggest fool in New York City. Mrs. Blackwell? The voice belonged to James, the elderly butler who'd become more of a confidant than an employee over the past 6 months. Mr. Blackwell is requesting to see you in his study. Sarah's stomach clenched. She couldn't face him. Not yet. Not when she could still taste the lie on her lips, still feel the weight of the secret pressing against her chest like a physical force. "Tell him I'm not feeling well," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "Ma'am, with all due respect, he's been calling your name for the past hour. Perhaps it would be better to—" "I said no, James." The sharpness in her voice surprised them both. Sarah had never been anything but polite, grateful even, for the way the household staff had welcomed her into this world of marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but gratitude felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. 6 months earlier. The coffee shop on East 84th Street wasn't the kind of place where billionaires typically grabbed their morning caffeine fix, which is exactly why Sarah Martinez loved working there. Tucked between a vintage bookstore and a small flower shop, Brew & Bloom catered to neighborhood regulars who knew her name and asked about her evening classes at Columbia. "The usual Mrs. Chen," Sarah called out as the elderly woman shuffled through the door, shaking raindrops from her umbrella. "You're an angel, dear," Mrs. Chen beamed. "Double-shot espresso, extra foam, and don't you dare charge me for that cinnamon you always sneak in." Sarah laughed, already reaching for the familiar blue cup. This was her world, predictable, warm, honest. A world where she could afford her tiny studio apartment in Washington Heights and still send a little money home to her mother in Phoenix every month. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah glanced up from the espresso machine to see a man she didn't recognize. Tall, probably early 30s, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it, and eyes the color of storm clouds. His expensive suit was soaked through, and he stood in the doorway looking completely lost. "Rough morning?" Sarah asked, wiping down the counter. He looked up, seemingly surprised to be addressed. "You could say that." His voice carried a slight rasp, like he'd been shouting. "I don't suppose you have anything that could salvage what's left of this disaster of a day." "That depends," Sarah grinned, already reaching for a large cup. "Are we talking spilled coffee on my shirt disaster, or my entire life is falling apart disaster?" For the first time since he'd walked in, the stranger's mouth curved into what might have been a smile. Somewhere in between. The specialty of the house. Sarah began crafting what her regulars had dubbed the lifesaver, a complex blend of espresso, steamed milk, a touch of vanilla, and a secret ingredient her grandmother had taught her. "One existential crisis latte coming right up." She worked in comfortable silence, aware that he was watching her movements with unusual intensity. Most customers buried themselves in their phones while she prepared their drinks. This man studied her like she was solving a complicated equation. "You're not from around here," he said finally. "Arizona," Sarah confirmed, adding the final touch of cinnamon. What gave it away? "You actually made eye contact when I walked in. New Yorkers don't do that." "Well, I've been here 3 years, so I'm practically a native." She slid the cup across the counter. "First ones on the house call it a disaster recovery fee." He stared at the cup, then at her, with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You don't know who I am." Sarah tilted her head. "Should I? Most people do. Most people probably care more about celebrity gossip than I do." She shrugged. "You seem like a decent guy who's having a bad day. That's all I need to know." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or relief. He took a sip of the latte and closed his eyes. "This is incredible." "Secret family recipe?" "Well, the cinnamon part is. The rest is just good coffee and paying attention." "Paying attention? To what people need?" You needed something comforting but not sweet, strong but not bitter, something that tastes like someone actually cares whether your day gets better. He was quiet for a long moment, just drinking the coffee and watching rain streak down the windows. Finally, he pulled out a business card and placed it on the counter. "I'm Alexander Blackwell, and I'd like to hire you." Sarah glanced at the card, thick, expensive paper with elegant lettering, Blackwell Industries. She'd heard the name before, usually followed by words like merger or acquisition on the business news her neighbor played too loudly through their thin apartment walls. "Mr. Blackwell, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not really looking for—" "Not for the company," he interrupted. "For me, personal chef. My housekeeper quit last week, and I haven't had a decent meal since. I can pay you 3 times whatever you make here." Sarah laughed. "That's very generous, but I don't know the first thing about fancy cooking. I make coffee and grilled cheese sandwiches, sometimes pasta if I'm feeling adventurous." "Perfect. I hate fancy cooking." Before she could respond, his phone rang. Alexander, Mr. Blackwell, glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor changed, shoulders tensing, jaw setting into a hard line. "I have to take this." He answered the call with a sharp, "What?" then listened, his expression growing darker by the second. "No, Marcus, absolutely not. We've discussed this, because I won't let you destroy people's lives for profit. I don't care what the board says." He ended the call and ran both hands through his hair, looking suddenly exhausted. "Big disaster or little disaster?" Sarah asked gently. "The kind that affects about 3,000 jobs." "Yikes." She refilled his cup without being asked. "Anything I can do to help?" Alexander looked at her again with that strange, intense expression. "Actually, yes. Have dinner with me tonight." "I'm sorry?" "Not a date," he said quickly. "Well, not exactly. I have this business dinner. Very important clients. They're traditional. They expect me to bring someone. My assistant usually handles it, but she's in London, and the woman I was supposed to bring—" He gestured vaguely. "Let's just say she's no longer speaking to me." Sarah set down the coffee pot. "You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" "Just for one evening. I'll pay you, of course. $500 for 4 hours of your time." $500? Sarah's mind raced. That was more than she made in 2 weeks at the coffee shop. It would cover her textbook expenses for the entire semester. "You'd have to wear something nice." "I can arrange for that too." "Why me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Alexander was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "Because in the 5 minutes I've been here, you've been kinder to me than anyone has been in months. And because when you look at me, you see a person, not a bank account." There was something vulnerable in his voice that made Sarah's chest tighten. She thought about her mother's medical bills, about the scholarship application sitting unfinished on her laptop because she couldn't afford the program fees, about all the ways $500 could change her immediate future. "One evening," she said finally. "Just dinner." "Just dinner," he agreed. Neither of them could have predicted that one lie, the pretense of being his girlfriend for a single evening, would grow into something that would shatter both their worlds. The restaurant was the kind of place Sarah had only seen in movies, all soft lighting and hushed conversations and waiters who glided between tables like dancers. The dress Alexander had sent her, a simple black number that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget, fit perfectly, though she had no idea how he'd guessed her size. "You look beautiful," he said when she met him at the entrance, and something in his voice made her believe he meant it. "You clean up pretty well yourself." It was true. Gone was the rain-soaked, disheveled man from the coffee shop. This Alexander Blackwell wore his expensive suit like armor, every detail perfect, from his polished shoes to the watch that probably cost more than her car. The clients turned out to be an elderly Japanese couple, the Yamadas, who were considering a major partnership with Blackwell Industries. Sarah quickly realized that Alexander hadn't been entirely honest about the evening's purpose. This wasn't just important, it was crucial. "My wife, Keiko, was concerned you had no family," Mr. Yamada explained over the appetizer course. "In our culture, a man without a family to ground him cannot be trusted with serious business." Alexander's hand found Sarah's under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I'm very lucky," he said, his voice warm with what sounded like genuine affection. "Sarah keeps me centered, reminds me what really matters." The lie came so easily, felt so natural, that Sarah almost believed it herself. As the evening progressed, she found herself relaxing into the role. Alexander was an attentive companion, asking about her studies, listening when she talked about her dreams of becoming a social worker. When Mrs. Yamada inquired about their future plans, Sarah found herself spinning a story about wanting to help at-risk youth, about her belief that everyone deserved a second chance. "You have chosen well," Mrs. Yamada told Alexander as they prepared to leave. "Your Sarah has a kind heart. This is worth more than many business degrees." In the car afterward, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. The easy conversation, the way he'd looked at her when she spoke about her work with literacy programs at the community center, none of it had felt like acting. "Thank you," Alexander said as they pulled up to her building in Washington Heights. "You saved my company tonight." "The partnership?" "Therein, Mr. Yamada texted while you were in the restroom." He handed her an envelope. "Your payment, plus a little extra." Sarah peeked inside and gasped. There was at least $1,000 there. "Alexander, this is too much." "It's not nearly enough." His voice was quiet, serious. "Sarah, I know this might sound crazy, but would you consider making this arrangement more permanent?" "Permanent. I need someone in my life, someone real, all the women in my social circle." He shook his head. "They see dollar signs, not a person. But you. When you look at me, I feel like myself again." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "You're talking about a fake relationship." "It doesn't have to be fake." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. "I can't," Sarah whispered. "Alexander, you don't really know me. This whole evening has been a performance." "Has it?" His eyes searched her face. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've been more honest with me tonight than anyone has been in years." After he left, Sarah sat in her tiny apartment holding the envelope and wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. She should have said no when he called the next morning, asking if she wanted to grab breakfast. Should have said no when breakfast turned into a walk through Central Park, which turned into lunch, which somehow became dinner at a small Italian place where Alexander laughed at her terrible attempts to pronounce the menu items. Should have said no when he offered to drive her to her evening classes, when he started showing up at the coffee shop during her shifts with elaborate excuses about needing caffeine, when he invited her to a charity gala, and she found herself in a world of champagne and designer gowns, where she felt simultaneously out of place and perfectly at home by his side. Should have said no when he kissed her for the first time, 3 weeks after that first dinner, standing in her doorway after another evening of what she was beginning to think of as their strange courtship. But Sarah had never been good at saying no to things that felt too good to be true. The relationship that had started as a business arrangement evolved into something that felt startlingly real. Alexander was nothing like the cold, calculating businessman the tabloids portrayed. He was funny, surprisingly down-to-earth and genuinely interested in her world. He came to her community center to watch her teach reading classes, donated anonymously to causes she cared about, and never once made her feel ashamed of her modest background. In return, Sarah found herself falling for the man behind the corporate facade. The Alexander who kept terrible reality TV shows on his DVR, who made pancakes from scratch on Sunday mornings, who stayed up late listening to her talk about her dreams of starting a non-profit for foster kids. "I love you," he said one evening in November, the words surprising them both. They were in his penthouse, curled up on the couch, watching an old movie, and the confession slipped out during a commercial break like it had been waiting for the chance. "I love you too," Sarah whispered back, and meant it completely. That's when she should have told him the truth. The lie started small, the way most destructive lies do. Sarah had been accepted to a prestigious graduate program in social work, but the tuition was beyond her reach. When Alexander noticed her distraction and asked what was wrong, she deflected, claiming she was just tired from work. "You should quit the coffee shop," he said, not for the first time. "Let me take care of you." I need to work, Alexander. I can't just be some kept woman. That's not what I meant. His voice was gentle, patient. I know independence is important to you, but you could focus on your studies. Maybe start that non-profit you're always talking about. I could help with the funding. It was a generous offer, born from love and genuine support. But Sarah couldn't accept it without feeling like she was betraying everything she'd worked for. So instead of telling him about the graduate program, about the financial aid she'd been denied, about the dreams that seemed to slip further away each day, she lied. I'm not ready for that yet, she said. Give me some time. Time, as if time could solve the fundamental problem of their relationship, that it had been built on a foundation of pretense, and now neither of them knew how to tell the truth without destroying what they'd created. The second lie came a month later, when Alexander's world began to intrude on their bubble of happiness. Marcus Whitmore, his business partner and oldest friend, made no secret of his disapproval of Sarah. "She's using you, Alex," she overheard him saying during a Christmas party at the penthouse. "Wake up. A little coffee shop girl doesn't fall in love with a billionaire for his sparkling personality." "You don't know what you're talking about." Alexander's voice was sharp with anger. "Don't I? What do you really know about her, Alex? Her background, her family, her real motivations? You met her 6 months ago and now you're talking about proposing. It's textbook gold digging." Sarah had fled to the bathroom, her hands shaking as she stared at herself in the mirror. Marcus wasn't entirely wrong, was he? She had taken money from Alexander that first night. She was living in his world now, wearing clothes he bought, eating at restaurants she could never afford on her own. When Alexander found her 10 minutes later, she was composed but fragile. "Don't listen to Marcus," he said immediately. "He's suspicious of everyone." "Maybe he has a reason to be." "Sarah." Alexander cupped her face in his hands. "I know you. I know your heart. Nothing Marcus says could change how I feel about you." That's when she should have told him everything. About the money troubles, about the graduate program, about the growing panic that she wasn't good enough for his world, and never would be. Instead, she kissed him and whispered, "I love you too," and let the moment pass. The third lie was the one that would eventually destroy them both. January brought news that changed everything. Sarah's mother called on a Tuesday evening, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Mika, I don't know how to tell you this." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "Mum, what's wrong?" "The doctors found something. A mass. They want to do more tests, but—" Her mother's voice broke. "The insurance won't cover the specialists. I'm so scared, Sarah." The phone slipped from Sarah's numb fingers. Cancer. The word hung in the air like a death sentence, bringing with it the weight of every fear Sarah had carried since her father's death when she was 16. Alexander found her on the floor of his bedroom 2 hours later, still clutching the phone, tears streaming down her face. "What happened?" He was beside her instantly, gathering her into his arms. "My mother," Sarah managed through the sobs. "She's sick, really sick, and I don't have enough money to help her." Hey. Alexander's voice was soft, soothing. "We'll figure this out. Whatever she needs, however much it costs, we'll take care of it." "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking, I'm offering. Sarah, I love you. Your family is my family." It would have been so easy to say yes. To let him write a check that would solve her mother's problems without even denting his bank account. But something in Sarah rebelled against the idea, some stubborn streak of pride that insisted she had to handle this herself. "I need some time," she said. "Let me talk to her doctors, see what options we have." Alexander looked like he wanted to argue, but he simply nodded. "Whatever you need." That night, lying in his arms while he slept, Sarah made a decision that would haunt her for months to come. She would find a way to pay for her mother's treatment herself. She wouldn't be just another woman who'd solved her problems by falling in love with a rich man. The opportunity came from an unexpected source. Marcus Whitmore called her the next day, his voice oily with false sympathy. "Sarah, dear, I heard about your mother. What a terrible situation." "How did you—" Sarah began, then stopped. Of course, Alexander would have told his business partner about the crisis. "I'd like to help," Marcus continued. "Not charity, you understand. A business proposition. I'm listening." I'm prepared to write you a check for whatever your mother needs. Call it $50,000, more than enough to cover the best care available. And in return, you disappear from Alexander's life, cleanly, quietly. Tell him you've realized you're not compatible, that you want different things. Let him move on with someone more suitable. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. You're offering to pay me to break up with him. I'm offering to save your mother's life in exchange for you stepping aside so Alexander can find real happiness with someone from his own world. The worst part was that Marcus made it sound reasonable, logical even. Sarah wasn't from Alexander's world. She'd been pretending since the day they met. Maybe it was kinder to end things now, before they got in any deeper. I need time to think, she heard herself saying. Of course, but don't take too long. Your mother's condition won't wait indefinitely. That night, Sarah couldn't bring herself to go back to the penthouse. She called Alexander with some excuse about helping a friend and spent the night in her old apartment, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how her life had become so complicated. She should have told Alexander about Marcus's offer, should have trusted that their love was strong enough to withstand outside interference, should have remembered that the best relationships are built on honesty, not protection. Instead, she decided to handle it herself. The plan was simple. She would take the money from Marcus, pay for her mother's treatment, and then tell Alexander the truth. All of it. About the financial struggles, about Marcus's offer, about how much she loved him but couldn't keep living a lie. What she didn't expect was for Alexander to propose. He did it on Valentine's Day, in the same coffee shop where they'd met. Sarah had agreed to meet him for lunch, planning to confess everything and end their relationship before it could hurt them both any more than necessary. Instead, she walked in to find the entire cafe decorated with roses and fairy lights, Alexander waiting by their usual table with a ring box in his hands, and an expression of such hopeful nervousness that her heart cracked in two. Sarah Martinez, he said, dropping to one knee as every customer in the place turned to watch. You've made me believe in love again. You've made me want to be a better man. Will you marry me? The ring was perfect, a simple solitaire that caught the light like a captured star, not flashy or ostentatious, but elegant and timeless, the kind of ring that said he knew her, understood what she would want. Yes, she whispered, because saying no in front of 30 strangers felt impossible, because part of her desperately wanted it to be true, because she was 24 years old and terrified and in love with a man who deserved so much better than her lies. The cafe erupted in applause. Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her while cameras flashed, and her heart shattered into pieces that would take months to reassemble. That evening, as they celebrated their engagement with champagne and take-out Chinese food in his penthouse, Sarah tried 3 times to tell him the truth. Each time Alexander would say something about their future, about the wedding they'd planned, about the life they'd build together, and the words would die in her throat. 2 days later, she met Marcus in a downtown cafe and accepted his check. The next 3 months were the happiest and most miserable of Sarah's life. Her mother's treatment was successful. The tumor was benign, easily removed with an excellent prognosis. Alexander threw himself into wedding planning with an enthusiasm that would have been endearing if Sarah hadn't known it was all built on a foundation of lies. They set a date for June. Sarah found herself swept up in the fairy tale despite herself, touring venues with Alexander's assistant, trying on dresses that cost more than cars, tasting cakes and flowers and everything else that went into creating the perfect society wedding. You don't seem excited, Alexander observed one evening in May. They were going over the guest list, and Sarah had been staring at the names of people she'd never met, who expected to celebrate her fake happiness. I'm just overwhelmed, she said, which was true enough. This is all so much bigger than I expected. We could elope, he offered immediately. Vegas or somewhere tropical. Just us. For a moment, Sarah let herself imagine it. A small ceremony, just the two of them, where maybe the vows would feel real enough to overcome the lies that had brought them there. No, she said finally. Your family and friends want to celebrate with us. It wouldn't be fair to them. What she didn't say was that eloping would make it harder to disappear when the time came, Because despite Marcus's payment, despite her mother's recovery, Sarah had never stopped planning her exit. She couldn't marry Alexander while keeping such a massive secret, but she couldn't tell him the truth without destroying the love she saw in his eyes every day. So she kept planning to leave and kept not leaving, trapped in a purgatory of her own creation. The end came not from her own confession, but from an investigative reporter who'd been digging into Blackwell Industries' recent business dealings. Sarah was at her final dress fitting when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made her answer. "Miss Martinez, this is Rebecca Torres from the New York Herald. I'm working on a story about Blackwell Industries, and I was hoping you could comment on your relationship with Marcus Whitmore." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you're talking about. I have bank records showing a $50,000 payment from Mr. Whitmore to your account in February, the same week your engagement to Mr. Blackwell was announced. I'm sure there's an innocent explanation, but given Mr. Whitmore's history of trying to manipulate Mr. Blackwell's personal relationships..." The phone slipped from Sarah's numb fingers, clattering to the floor of the boutique fitting room. Around her, white silk and lace seemed to close in like a beautiful, suffocating trap. She had perhaps 6 hours before the story went live. 6 hours to decide whether to run or to finally tell Alexander the truth. She chose truth, but she was already too late. Alexander was waiting for her in his study when she arrived at the penthouse. The newspaper spread across his desk like evidence in a murder trial. The headline read, "Billionaire's fiancé paid to leave by business partner inside the Blackwell love triangle. Is it true?" His voice was quiet, controlled, but Sarah could see the devastation in his eyes. "Alexander, let me explain. Is it true?" Each word was precisely enunciated, like he was afraid of what might happen if he let his emotions leak into them. "Yes." The word came out as barely a whisper. Alexander closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were empty of everything Sarah had come to treasure: the warmth, the love, the way he looked at her like she was his whole world. "Get out. Please, just listen to me for 5 minutes. It's not what you think. Get out of my house, get out of my life. Keep the ring if you want, or sell it, I don't care." He turned away from her, staring out the window at the city spread below. "I never want to see you again." Sarah stood there for a moment, memorizing the line of his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the windowsill, the man she'd fallen in love with, and then lost through her own cowardice and pride. "I love you," she said to his back. "I know you don't believe me, but I do. I have since that first morning in the coffee shop, and taking Marcus's money was the stupidest thing I've ever done, and if I could take it back..." "But you can't." Alexander's voice was hollow. "You can't take back the lie, Sarah. You can't take back the fact that for 3 months you let me plan a wedding to a woman who was never real." He was right, and they both knew it. So Sarah took off the ring that had never really belonged to her, placed it on his desk, and walked out of the fairy tale she'd never deserved in the first place. Present day. Standing in the penthouse 6 months later, Sarah wondered how she'd ended up back where it all began. The answer was complicated and simple at the same time. Alexander had never cashed Marcus's check. She'd discovered it by accident, going through old bank statements while helping her mother organize her medical records. The $50,000 was still there, marked as pending but never processed, which meant that for 6 months, while Sarah had been rebuilding her life, working double shifts at a new coffee shop in Brooklyn, and starting graduate school with financial aid she'd finally accepted, Alexander had been protecting her even after she'd broken his heart. That's what had brought her here tonight, to this penthouse that felt like visiting a museum of her own happiness. Not to ask for forgiveness, she wasn't sure she deserved it, but to return the money and finally tell him the whole truth. But now, facing the prospect of seeing him again, Sarah realized she'd been fooling herself. She wasn't here just to clear her conscience. She was here because she missed him desperately. Because 6 months hadn't been enough time to forget the way he made her coffee exactly right, or the sound of his laugh when she told terrible jokes. She was here because she was still in love with him, and she didn't know how to stop. "Sarah!" She spun around to find Alexander standing in the doorway of the study, and her heart broke all over again. He looked tired, older somehow. Like the past 6 months had aged him in ways that went beyond mere time. His hair was longer than he usually wore it, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Hi," she managed. "James said you weren't feeling well." I lied. Again. The words came out with a bitter laugh. "Seems to be my specialty." Alexander stepped into the room, but didn't come closer. "Why are you here, Sarah?" She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "This belongs to you." He frowned, taking the envelope and looking inside. His expression shifted when he saw the check. "Sarah, you never cashed it. Why?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, staring at the check like it contained answers he wasn't ready to give. Finally, he looked up at her. "Because I knew why you took it." "You knew?" "I hired a private investigator after you left, not to spy on you," he said quickly, "to make sure you were okay. He told me about your mother's diagnosis, about the timing. It wasn't hard to figure out what happened." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Then why didn't you call? Why didn't you—" "Because you still chose his money over trusting me." Alexander's voice was soft but firm. "Even after 8 months together, even after I'd told you I loved you, you couldn't believe that I would have helped you without expecting anything in return." The accusation hit like a physical blow because it was true. Sarah had been so afraid of being seen as a gold digger that she'd acted exactly like one. "You're right," she whispered. "I was a coward. I was so terrified of proving Marcus right, of being just another woman who solved her problems by falling in love with a rich man that I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me." "Sarah, no, let me finish, please." She took a shaky breath. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix what I broke, but I need you to know that everything else was real. The way I felt about you, the woman I was when I was with you, that wasn't an act. That was the most honest I've ever been in my life." Alexander set the check down on the coffee table and finally closed the distance between them. "Why now? Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm graduating next month. Because I got into that non-profit program I was always talking about. Because my mother is healthy and I'm starting the life I always wanted. And none of it means anything without you there to share it with." Sarah looked up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Because I realized that being afraid of being a gold digger was just another way of lying to both of us about what we meant to each other." And what did we mean to each other? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with 6 months of pain and regret and love that had never quite died. "We meant everything," Sarah said simply. "At least you did to me." Alexander studied her face for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly he reached up and wiped away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I missed you," he said quietly. "Every damn day I missed you." "I missed you too." "I don't know how to trust this," he admitted. "I don't know how to trust us." "Neither do I," Sarah said honestly. "But I know I love you. Not your money, not your world, you. The man who makes pancakes from scratch and watches terrible reality TV and listens to me ramble about foster care reform like it's the most fascinating thing he's ever heard." Alexander's hand was still on her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek like he was memorizing it. "I love you too," he said finally. "I never stopped. But Sarah, if we do this again—" "No more lies," she promised. "No more pride getting in the way of honesty. No more pretending to be something I'm not." "And no more Marcus," Alexander added with the ghost of a smile. "Definitely no more Marcus." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home and starting over at the same time. Like the fairy tale had been real after all, just interrupted by fear and misunderstanding and the very human tendency to complicate simple things. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked when they finally broke apart. "Now we start over. The right way this time." Alexander picked up the check and tore it in half. "No lies, no secrets, no business arrangements, just us." "Just us," Sarah agreed, and for the first time in 6 months, she felt like she could finally breathe again. Outside, the rain had stopped, and Manhattan sparkled in the clearing darkness like a city full of second chances. It wasn't the ending Sarah had expected when she walked into the penthouse that evening, but it was better than any fairy tale she could have imagined. After all, the best love stories aren't about perfect people finding each other. They're about imperfect people choosing to love each other anyway, lies and secrets and mistakes included. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get the chance to rewrite your story with the truth.